Let's shift gears for just a moment and let's go on to something else. And we're going to talk real briefly because this has been in play for the last couple of years. SB326 came about due to another tragic accident that I believe happened in 2015, where in Berkeley, a balcony collapsed in a building that wasn't even that old. It was under 10 years old. It happened to collapse, and it actually killed 6 people.
I think there were 13 people on the deck. And what people said originally was they thought maybe the deck had been overloaded because there were 13 people out there. But what they found was that the way it had been designed, it was well within the structural limits to be able to support. When the engineers went in and did the forensics, what they found was that the waterproofing system had failed.
Yeah.
And it allowed moisture to get down into, this is a wood structure. So even though it had lightweight concrete on top of it, the actual structural supports were dimension lumber. So it was 2 by 10.
And this was a cantilevered deck.
Exactly. It was hanging out off the building. And so the whole thing, it was on the 5th floor. And so the whole thing sheared off the front of the building. And these kids tragically fell 5 stories. It's why there were so many deaths and so many just horrific injuries. And so both SB 326 and 721 came out of that as the state's response. 721 was passed first, and that's the one that deals with apartments. And then 326 is the one that deals with homeowners associations. And the rules are they're similar but slightly different. Mm-hmm. But ultimately what it boils down to, and I'm glad you said that it was the deck or the balcony bill, because that's what a lot of people think, is this only has to do with balconies. And that is what triggered this. But what the state law requires is inspection of any wood structural element of a building that's designed for human occupancy, so someplace a person is designed to go out onto, and it has to have primarily wood supporting it. So whether that's posts or it's cantilevered with beams that come out or it's a combination. And then it has to be more than 6 feet above the ground. So this could include stairs, landings, balconies, bridges, if you've got residential complexes, catwalks that people can use to get to the front door or the back doors of their units. All of those things are captured and all of those need to have an inspection. And you know, it's interesting. One of the things you were saying was, well, how can you visually inspect these? What should managers or board members be looking for? There's certainly things you can see, but the reality is the way the law is written, we are a firm that does these inspections. And so we'll actually have to come in and drill holes and put bore scopes. It's a tool that allows us to actually get a camera up inside that has a light on it so we can see in these cavity spaces, so we can actually see. And I can't tell you the number of times I've looked at decks where it looks perfect from the outside.
Oh, I've seen some that don't look perfect.
Well, absolutely.
I've walked on decks and want to get off fast.
Yeah, those are easy. The ones that are terrifying, like this Berkeley situation, are the ones where it actually looks fine from the outside, and then you look at it inside and you realize that it's rotting from the interior.
When I first read the bill, I believe it said to the inspection of the least intrusive method.
Right. So we're supposed to use the least intrusive method of observation possible.
Okay.
So we always start with a visual inspection.
Okay.
And then we've determined that using a bore scope is the least intrusive means we feel comfortable. And it's actually at the inspector's discretion to determine what the appropriate level of intrusiveness needs to be.
Okay.
We always tell our clients, look, we may get in here and find that we're seeing stuff on the bore scope that leads us to believe there are bigger problems. So we may still have to come back later and open up more to determine what the appropriate fix is going to be, what repair is going to be required.
So you're doing destructive testing to see the timbers, the joist.
But for the initial inspections, we're required, there's a statistical number of units we have to look at. We actually went out and hired a statistician to help us come up with a formula that we can use to determine how many of each of these elements need to be inspected. And then what we do is we have to use our professional judgment and experience to determine, is it appropriate to do one bore scope, look in and say, oh, that's pretty deteriorated. Okay, we know what we're seeing. Or if it looks clean, do we do multiple?
This is not something that one and done. You're not done. I understand that this needs to take place at least in 326, every 9 years thereafter. Is that correct?
That's correct. So what happens with this is the report that the inspector comes up with becomes part of the association's permanent records.
Okay.
And so it's actually a disclosable document. They have to give it out to all their current members. It becomes part of their reserve study. And then they have to, any prospective buyer actually is going to get a copy of this
Wow.
when they get the CCNRs and everything else, so that people know, hey, these inspections have taken place. This is what was found. What's required is that these inspections be redone every 9 years. The subsequent inspections have to go back and reference the previous report. And associations are required to maintain these records part of that cycle. Even though 9 years is what's the minimum, I've been talking to some associations that are saying, and some reserve analysts who are saying that they're actually recommending to their clients, hey, you might actually want to do this more frequently so that you can stay on top of things. Because as you know, a lot of things can deteriorate in 9 years. Something that looks great today, if you do absolutely no maintenance on it, could be a nightmare in 9 years.
And I'll tell you, this bill here, we're not doing the inspections on it, but I can tell you that our deck coding programs have increased. People are aware of it. We know that we have to maintain it. So we're actually putting an effort into to maintain these things so we don't have catastrophic failures. And I have a question for you, though, because you mentioned the borescope putting in an inspection port, you're drilling a 5/8 inch hole. Okay, minimal.
Yeah, no, it's we're making it as small as we possibly can.
Well, I think that's great.
So what we're requiring is that our clients have someone come back behind us then and patch back the stucco, restore the finish so that everything's back to the way it was originally.
But I've been doing it again in 9 years.
So one of the things we're recommending actually is, and not every association is in a financial position to want to do this, but we're at least recommending it as an option. A lot of these balconies don't actually have vents.
So there's no breathing inside.
Exactly. There's a number of products out there now where manufacturers are making retrofit vent. A contractor can come in and cut a strip, install this vent, patch back the stucco around it, and these vents actually swing down. And now a future inspector has an opening into the inside. You still have to run a borescope up it so you can see what's happening in that entire cavity. But now I'm not coming back in and drilling holes. But it also allows, as you said, a little bit of air circulation, which allows any moisture that might get in there to have a place to dry out. It's not going to drain. That's not the intention, but it just allows it to evaporate. And let's be clear, these inspections aren't inexpensive. The law, as with a lot of laws in California, this is what's known as a self-enforcing statute. And what that means in layman's terms is boards are going to get sued by their members if they're not doing this. It's because there's not a inspection police that's going to come around and say, have you guys done your inspection? They're relying on private citizens, members of these associations, to actually rat out their own associations and say, hey, our board, our management company is not doing what they're supposed to be doing. That's why it's so important to make sure you're getting an inspector to come in and do these who knows what's required, who can follow the proper procedures, who can make sure that everything's being done right, because A, it helps protect the associations, it helps them preserve their common areas. Even though these balconies and walkways a lot of times are exclusive use common areas, it's still something the association is responsible for, but it also protects the association from being sued.
I'm so happy that you're talking about that, because I have so many managers and I have board members when I go to board meetings saying, okay, yeah, we understand SB326 is here, but who's the deck cop? Who's going to come and how am I going to be busted? It's just going to go away. And you're speaking the truth to it, is that, yeah, you're right. There isn't not a police officer that has a deck badge on. Exactly. Am I correct? But the last thing I want to do is I want to be sued. And the problem is when you get someone within an association that comes back and sues you, they're one of the owners, they're suing themselves.
Exactly.
It's a vicious cycle, you guys. So I'm so glad you brought that up, because I believe a lot of the managers out there and a lot of the board members that actually are seeing this right now with us, it answers questions for them.
To actually fund for maintenance.
Yes.
Because again, you're raising taxes on yourself effectively. Yes. Every time you sit there as a board member and say, we need to increase our assessment because we need to pay for these things, for boards to be able to use a law like SB 326 to say, hey, it's not us saying we have to do this. The state's mandating it. We have to come in and do this. We have to fund for these inspections. We have to fund for any repairs that are identified. Hey, you're on notice. You need to be doing maintenance and doing these things. And I think that's why you're seeing so many people proactively reaching out to you and saying, hey, we need to do this. The challenge is ProTec tends to get hired by associations that are organized, that are willing to pay the money to bring in a professional maintenance company to do stuff.
If you're not professionally managed, you're not involved in CAI, CACM, there's no one there educating with you. That's an eye-opener. And it's something that has to be taken care of. The last thing you want is a catastrophic failure.
Exactly.
There's grumblings that I'm hearing about. I mean, SB 326 became a California law due to what happened in Berkeley. This incident just took place in Florida. I'm hearing grumbling that there may be new legislature that comes out for inspections for our aging infrastructure. We do have an aging infrastructure.
We do.
We have mid-rise, high-rises. I mean, we're living in an aging community. And the average age of an association, I have associations that are 50 years old. You want to speak about that for a moment?
So one of the things we saw with like you said, SB 326 was a law that came out of a tragedy.
Correct.
We know that frequently we see legislation either at the federal level or at the state level that comes out of tragedies. We know that infrastructure writ large is a big deal. The American Institute of Architects, I'm a member of that group, actually has been lobbying Congress to say buildings should be treated as infrastructure just the same as roads and bridges, because we have all of these buildings that need to be rehabilitated and are going to need to be thought about. So there are people that are certainly thinking about this. We know that with the tragedy in Florida, there are 4 federal agencies on the ground. Some of the ones you would expect, FEMA and OSHA, but one of the organizations is one that a lot of people don't know about. It's the National Institute for Standards and Technologies, NIST, and it's kind of like, you know how when there's a plane crash or a train crash or something like that, the feds have a team that they send out from the transportation department to try to figure out, how did this happen? How do we make this safer for everyone? NIST does the same thing for buildings. They were created and they existed before, but they got this mission after the September 11th terrorist attacks in New York City. And people trying to figure out, how did those buildings collapse? How can we make these buildings safer? So they're actually on the ground in Florida, and it is entirely possible that they're going to come out with recommendations. They're a fact-finding agency. They're not a fault-finding agency. And so what they're trying to do is figure out what caused this, and then they're going to make recommendations to Congress. They're going to make recommendations to the organizations that write the building code, the model building codes that are used by so many jurisdictions, including California. There are some laws on the books already. I think we'll probably see some more. We will certainly probably see some building code changes.
Interesting. Well, I'm hoping that you can continue to work with us and be the eyes and the ears for our clients, for the board members, for the managers out there, and to continue this education with it. And Matthew, I want to thank you, because, I mean, I don't know, you spent the last half an hour with me chit-chatting here on the couch.
Yeah, no,
and I think it was real educational. I think people will benefit from this, and I think we should probably do this again and give an update on it. So I want to thank you for your time.
No problem, and thank you for having me in. I'm glad we were able to do it.
It's been a pleasure.
Thanks.